Anybody got some questions for Alicyn?
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, hey, I was, well, first I want to thank you for giving your talk about what the Sierra Club's doing. Love all the conservation work that's being done, and can appreciate what's happened in the past and what's happening right now.
Thank you.
But I guess my question, one would be about the uranium, just in terms of just the possibility, kind of bigger picture scenario of uranium supplying energy to all of our users with electricity, and how that the impacts of global warming, because it sounds like that is an alternative. But I know you might not touch on that larger picture, but it does seem like conservation groups pretty much focus in on their area and want to, it's the conservation groups that have enough money to do a really good job to cut out any kind of resource development. But the reality is that we do need resources. And how does that play just in terms of bigger picture? I guess I was just curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there's two answers to that. So one is that I think that there's other means by which we can cover our electrical needs and change what our electrical needs are and cover what they are. But the other thing is that the current amount of nuclear power that we have, nuclear power is extremely expensive and it's extremely risky. It takes a really long time to bring nuclear plants online. And the plants that we do have right now do not need domestic uranium. So when the uranium industry was actually trying to get a quota on how much power companies would actually have to purchase domestically, the nuclear power industry was unilaterally opposed to it. The reason that the uranium industry has been so destitute in the United States for so many decades is that our uranium is actually not very economically viable to mine. There are a lot of other places where it's way more viable to get it from, and we get most of our uranium from allies, from Canada and Australia. And so Arizona Public Service has actually stated that there is no shortage, that COVID's not going to affect them at all, that they have everything they need. And we'll see how things go over time. But for now, our domestic power industry does not actually want uranium from places like Grand Canyon. These are very small deposits. They're going to be mined out very quickly, but the contamination is going to be there forever. And the place that's at risk is way too important. So I think regardless of the fact we could argue over, some people say nuclear isn't going to be the future and some people say it's not. We could argue about that. I know how I feel about it. But regardless of that, should we be mining uranium at Grand Canyon? I don't think there's any reason to. I don't think that that's going to be our energy future. I think it's going to be our contamination future if we
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining that for me, your thoughts on that. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Other questions?
Any other questions around? Alicyn, I was wondering, now that FERC has, given their preliminary approval, I don't really understand how they can do feasibility studies if they can't. I don't want them on site. We really did not want to even see it go this far, but I can't understand, when they got opposition even from the Department of the Interior and the Navajo Nation itself, much less, just tons and tons of environmental groups and individuals. They must have gotten flooded with comments, showing that it was so unfeasible up front that there was no point in doing feasibility studies. Why, where it sort of goes from here and how they can even possibly show it might be feasible.
Yeah, so our comments, I'm not, I don't think Grand Canyon River Guides filed with us. We filed for intervener status with a number of other groups, and those comments were written, or that filing was written by an attorney with Earth Justice, Michael Hyatt, and the Earth Justice attorney that we work with, his assessment of this was that this is kind of standard, that FERC has a lot of leeway on granting these things. He of course thought it was ridiculous that they didn't deny it because, I mean, everybody thought it was going to be denied. It's just opposed by everyone and then some. But he said, legally that they do have a lot of this ability to grant this preliminary permit, and it doesn't really mean very much except that they can do this feasibility study. But yeah, you're right. They're looking at Google Earth and finding basins and finding elevation changes and choosing places all over the state where they think they could just put these projects. And I mean, the fact that when this was first proposed, they didn't know what a humpback chub was. They didn't know what the Sipapoo was. They had no idea what the Escalade was. They had never heard of that. I mean, they were completely clueless. It's very obvious that they just went into this off of a map. And so what we're thinking is that this Big Canyon proposal is their attempt to be like, oh, well, we wouldn't be flooding Sipapoo, and those humpback chub are in, they're downstream, and, we'll be using groundwater instead of surface water. And so I think they think that they're solving the problem with this other proposal. That other proposal is hasn't gone to the public yet. There will be, at some point they'll put a Federal Register notice and they'll open it to public comment to see if they can get the preliminary permit on that. But that's our best guess without actually talking to the developers of what they're thinking, is that they are going to propose this other thing as a compromise. But if you ask, I'm sure anybody on this meeting right now, it's a terrible compromise. It doesn't compromise anything at all. It's just awful. So yeah, did that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure that GCRG did sign on to the Earth Justice letter, but we'll obviously be really desirous as it goes forward to keep our community informed, and when there is action that needs to be taken, we'll be right there trying to help.
Yeah, the company that is filing, like, their contact information is on the filing, so you can, if you feel so inclined, contact them and ask them questions directly. That's not my tactic that I'm going to take, but it is all there. I haven't heard a peep from them since then. I know there's a lot of media covering this story, so I'm sure they're going to get a lot of media inquiries, so maybe we'll learn in the next few days from some of those stories.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Well, thank you for keeping track of things.
Trying. Zeke, did you have a question?
I had a question. Isn't there language in the LTEMP that states that the sediment that inflow to the canyon from the Little Colorado is important to the environment there, and that was one of the reasons that it was included in the EIS laws and et cetera, et cetera? Would that, if that's true, would that not override this proposal?
Yeah, I'm trying to, that was in the Department of Interior filing. I'm trying to remember. There was something about how it would completely void part of the LTEMP. And I'm sorry, this has not been on my mind until yesterday. It was just like, whoa, one more thing. So I haven't looked at that in a while, but if you look at that Department of Interior filing, I know that they discussed that in there.
And there was a bunch of stuff in there about the LTEMP in general. So, I mean, it addressed chub issues in the LTEMP, it addressed sediment issues. So yes, I don't know about null and void, but there'd be a pretty strong case against it just based on the LTEMP alone, let alone millions of other reasons.
Yeah, thank you. John, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. Hey, thank you for being here on your Friday evening, Allison.
No worries.
Um, Two quick questions. You mentioned the Grand Canyon Centennial Protection Act, and I was wondering how would you characterize the differences between this and then the previously proposed the Greater Grand Canyon Heritage National Monument proposal? What were the big differences and how did that change? And then I guess to piggyback off that, you mentioned that this went to the Senate in January, and then COVID came along. I'm curious, do you think realistically that the Senate, as it is now composed, was actually going to pass this piece of environmental legislation?
Yeah, it was December. She introduced it on like Christmas Eve, which I said something to me about her sentiment. You know, I don't think she wanted a lot of fanfare when she dropped this on the Senate floor. And that was Kirsten Sinema. Yeah, I mean, I think that there needs to be a lot of support. I don't think that it's impossible for the Senate. You know, I mean, it took 10 years just to get this out of the House, so that was a big deal. But it had huge support in the House, and I don't think it's totally impossible. I mean, there are other mining withdrawals that have been encouraged by this administration, and you know, in particular under the previous Secretary of Interior, who had his pet spot that he wanted a mining withdrawal. So I mean, it is possible. Like, was it likely? No. But if we could get more co-sponsors, you know, then build more momentum, you know, it's one of those things that you just keep it coming, and then hopefully one day it would happen. This is different than the monument proposal in a few different ways. One, the monument proposal was a slightly different footprint. The monument proposal did include the North Kaibab and had some restrictions on logging on the North Kaibab, so it probably would have prevented some of the bad problems in this Burnt Corral project, because it would have particularly protected old growth and had only vegetation treatment for ecological benefit and not for timber production, which this is clearly a timber sale project. And so that would have been really helpful right now. So this is only the Bureau of Land Management and Forest Service land that's outside of that. The North Kaibab is already off limits to mining because of an older designation as a game preserve. And there is a little slight difference in some of the boundaries, just, you know, off by a few acres. But other than that, the protections are largely the same, you know, as far as the mining goes. Just this would make it off limits to mining. You know, I think there was just a lot different perception of what a monument means. And so the type of opposition, you know, I mean, there was like a lot of rancher opposition and a lot of fear and lack of understanding of how it would affect commercial services and things like that. And this bill is way more clear on that, you know, the only thing affected, I mean, it's the shortest bill on the planet. It's like 3 lines. It just says that there wouldn't be entry for creating new mining claims. It says that there wouldn't be oil and gas drilling or helium drilling as well under the leasing laws. And then it says that there's a map. And that's like the entire bill.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Allison. Oh, and I want to correct something I said earlier. GCRG actually submitted our own comments to FERC back in November of 2019. And I bet a bunch of people that are on this Zoom call probably did too. So anyway, we will stand poised for the next round.
Who knows what's going to come up next? It's just amazing. It was like, you know, just when you think you've seen everything that could possibly be threatening, and then that showed up. It's like, what?
Right. Yeah. There's always some crazy new scheme.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, thank you all so much. I'm going to stop the recording right now. I really appreciate it, Alicyn. It's been super informative.